This is Lee Phillips, Journey of Truth. We are at the Old Zion Cemetery with the Historical Society of Loganville for a tour. We're going to start recording and we're just going to listen in.
What do you do with all the pictures you take?
Did you sign in already?
Yeah, well, that's what I told him.
What do you do? I said, I get invited to all the
Things I appreciate a while ago when I told me he was there.
I don't really see anybody. That's weird. I mean, to be right here.
still live here in Logan?
Yeah. I've seen Melanie a couple of times.
I live out in
Oh, okay.
It's really fortunate. I've been out there.
Yeah, I remember you told me that is your husband still alive?
He just retired.
Did he? Okay.
Jack.
All right.
You mean? She drove me up here.
Oh, she at that.
I think so. No Jenny Tribble ain't.
Okay, well, don't touch me. Did you wash your hands? Find out. I'm like, get away from me now.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I really go back and I just but since she paid it, she's
If that could have your attention, please. We certainly want to welcome everyone today. It's turned in such a beautiful, beautiful day. And we surely do appreciate all of you being here. We are anchored today by Melanie Long and Richard Jenkins. And they worked hard to put this together. I think they've had some help. But at any point, we appreciate all the work they have put into this. And I hope everyone has signed in. If you have not signed in, please come by and sign in for us, because we would like to know you were here and how many were here. Melanie?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm turning it over to you, my lady. Welcome, everyone. Okay.
If everybody wants to move on in, because it's going to be hard to hear, we don't have any kind of microphone system today. And I'll try to talk loud. And we'll get going. Now, first of all, I am Melanie Long. I'm on the board of the Historic Society of Loganville. And I might as well own up to it. I'm on the city council for the city of Loganville. Don't hold that against me, because I'm one of the good ones, okay? So, we did a cemetery tour last year. I don't know how many of y'all were here last year. We did the Loganville Memorial Gardens. And when Peggy asked me if I'd do it again, I enjoyed doing that one so much. I said, sure, I'll do it. And then she told me which cemetery we were doing. I'm like, okay, that's going to be fascinating. And as I started researching, what I realized, there just aren't any records that were kept over here. I think y'all are all aware. If you're not, this is our historically, this is our black cemetery in the city of Loganville. And I probably got about 50 or 60 hours of research trying to find information of just in general about this cemetery and the people buried here, because we want to honor them. And I don't know, one night as I was sitting there just going through newspapers from the 1800s and just everything I was doing, all of a sudden it hit me like a ton of bricks. There's no records, because when this cemetery started, most of the people that were buried here were either recently freed slaves or they were laborers, and they probably didn't know how to read and write. And so therefore, they just weren't able to keep records. So following the end of slavery, the freed people, they did develop their own burial grounds. And during the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, many black cemeteries were affiliated with local black churches, benevolent societies, or burial leagues. In the Old Zion Cemetery, that's an excellent example of that. Because the Old Zion Cemetery was established at the very tail end of the 19th century. On July the 8th, 1899, a gentleman named Elijah Monroe Rockmore Jr., he sold the land that we're standing on to the Mount Zion AME Zion Church for the sum of $45. Wow. Now, that doesn't sound like much. And in today's standards, that would be $1,700. But you're talking about in 1899, a poor black church was able to raise $45 to have a place to honor their deceased. That was a lot of money, and that was a big thing for them to accomplish. Mr. Rockmore, you probably recognize the Rockmore name. If you came to the Loganville Gardens tour, he's actually buried over there in the Loganville Memorial Gardens. Now, he was born in 1851. He died in 1902 at the age of 51. So one of the last things, since he sold this land in 1899 and died in 1902, one of his last business transactions was to make sure that the black people of Loganville had a proper burial place. Old Zion Cemetery right now currently covers 2.18 acres. I'm sure it was larger back in the day, but it's been encroached upon by development. But right now, as we're standing here, this is 2.18 acres. Most recently, the property was surveyed in July of 2000, and then again it was partially resurveyed in February of 2002. The surveyor stated, and as some of y'all have been already walking around, so you can testify to this, the surveyor stated that the rows are not consistent, and his actual words are, "They're crooked as a darn dog's leg." And they are. If you walk out here, there's no rhyme or reason. It's like there's a little clump here, and they're over there, they're everywhere. There's 275 graves have been identified in this cemetery, but only about half of them have been marked with headstones. The earliest recorded burial that I can find for this cemetery was a little 13-year-old baby named Essie Freeman. And she died on July 22nd, 1886. Now, I found that interesting because she died in 1886 and was buried, but yet this wasn't a cemetery officially until 1899. And I just wonder if, and I can't prove this, again, no record, so I'm just speculating here. Since the Rockmores were a very prominent family and owned literally thousands of acres, farmland and cattle land around here, I wonder if this land had already been being used as a place for them to bury their slaves and their laborers. And then it wasn't until later, maybe there was already folks buried here, that's why he decided to go ahead and make it a proper cemetery. That's speculation. I've tried to talk to the family. We can't get any information. They don't want to share their history. That's fine. Not everybody is all about preservation of history, but I know y'all are because you're here today, so I appreciate that. After little Essie Freeman, the next recorded burial I saw was 1900. And from 1900 moving forward, there seems to be 1 to 2 burials in this cemetery a year. And this is still an active cemetery. They've had burials here as recently as last year. And if you're a member of the Mount Zion AME Zion Church, you can be buried here for $500. If you are not a member, you don't want me telling all your secrets? If you are not a member here, you can be of the church. You can be buried here for $1,000. So they still are very much a benevolent church that want everybody to have a proper burial and have a place to be at the end of their life. Now the AME Zion, the Mount Zion AME Zion Church. Since this is their cemetery, let's go ahead and talk about a little history there. So this is their cemetery, and let's talk about their church. Their cornerstone of their church, and their church is located on Mill Street, technically Sorrells Drive. There's a little pig path that goes down there. If you're going up 78, before you get to CVS, there's a little restaurant called A Bite to Eat. It's a little trailer right there. Back in behind there is where the church is located, and they have a cornerstone on their building. And their church was organized in 1879, and it was built at the current location in 1899, the same year that this cemetery was founded. It was rebuilt under Pastor S.M. Jones in 1950, and it was dedicated under Pastor C.L. Avery in 1966. And of the 10 trustees that are listed on their cornerstone, 7 of those trustees are actually buried in the cemetery. So I'm a very inquisitive person. So as I was reading about the church, I wanted to know a little bit more about it. That's what history's about, learning more about things we don't know about. AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal. And the origins of the AME Zion Church, which is distinctly different from just the AME Church, the AME Zion Church, their roots can be traced to the John Street Methodist Church in New York City. And after a lot of overt discrimination among that church, many of the black Christians left to form their own church. And so the first AME Zion Church was built in 1800. And as the church grew, I found it interesting that even though they were a black church, they were still being ministered to by white ordained Methodist ministers, which actually caused debates and dissension among their own church. And so for years, they had debates that raged on. And in 1822, the AME Zion Church ordained their first black bishop. In 1866, they had a total membership of about 42,000. 2 years later, they claimed that membership to be 164,000. And after the Civil War, the AME Zion Church began sending missionaries to the South to plant new churches for newly emancipated freedmen. Some of the other interesting facts that I learned about the AME Zion Church that I want to share with you is, number one, they have been the leader among all Protestant denominations in ordaining women and giving them powerful roles in the church. And secondly, they have churches on every continent except Australia. I don't know why not Australia, but not Australia. During the Civil War, the death services industry developed as a result of the bodies of soldiers needing to be embalmed for transportation back to their homes to be buried. And a lot of the African American soldiers, they frequently served as medical assistants, where that's how they learned the skill and perfected the trade of embalming. After the war, the service moved from a trade to more of a professional business. And as the funeral profession grew and developed in the late 1800s, the Jim Crow laws, which were designed to separate black people and white people, actually drove business to African American funeral directors and away from white funeral directors. During that time, many of the funeral directors either refused to serve their black families or treated the black families with low priority. And the African American funeral homes, they maintained the traditions surrounding death that catered to the needs of the black community. And they would provide the burials, the wakes, and the home visits. And open caskets being a standard, the appearance of the deceased was very crucial, especially within the black community, as As white funeral directors, they not only did not know how to properly style African American hair, they also didn't know how to cosmetize the different skin tones and things. And so African American funeral directors were prepared and able to make sure that their deceased were handled with the respect and the skill required. The funeral trade was and remains largely segregated among racial, ethical, and religious lines, even to this day. African American funeral directors became some of the first and most successful business people serving the African American population in the late 1800s through the 20th century and on into the 21st century today. Black-owned and operated funeral homes have a rich heritage and are as much cultural institutions as they are businesses. And the entrepreneurs in that field were brought into the middle and upper classes, where they often become leadership figures in their communities. And a few weeks ago, I was out here walking around with Richard Jenkins. You want to come up, Richard? Richard Jenkins, he's a mortician at Tim Stewart's funeral home down here in Loganville. And I asked Richard to come here today to talk with y'all. He and I were walking because I had a lot of questions about why things were done a certain way. And so I've asked Richard to come up here and talk about that. And when he's done, we're going to come back and I've got some more information for you. But right now, I'm turning it over to Mr. Richard Jenkins.
Thank you. Melanie, you did a lot of homework on that one. I can say that Mr. Dan Young, that owned Young Funeral Home in Monroe, was very active in the NAACP for many, many years. Just a little bit of what I remember about being in funeral service. I've been in funeral service for 44 years, and I always remember this as being kind of a remote location. The road was not traveled like it is today. No houses or any schools or anything. Something that kind of stands out with me, and I don't know if many folks remember it, but Mr. Grover Jones that used to walk from Bay Creek to Loganville, he was coming through here one day, late one afternoon, and had a medical episode, and he fell out here in the cemetery, and he stayed here all night until somebody found him the next morning. But he was okay, so I thought that might be a little bit of information. And somebody might want to know. We had one come up and left and went back home. He was kind of a fella that you could offer to pick him up and say, "Mr. Grover, can I give you a ride to the house?" We'd carry him to the house, and the next thing you'd know, you'd meet when you went back to town and you was coming back. Grover would be going back to Logan. So, but like Melanie said, with the cemetery here, it's been infringed upon in a couple of places. It's always that I've always recognized it might be a little bit out of line, but it's always been very well kept up. And just wanted to bring to you a list of the funeral homes, elite funeral homes that we call them, that have served this cemetery. I have served this cemetery through the days of me working for Tom Wages in Lawrenceville, in Snellville, and with Tim Stewart here in Loganville. But what comes to stand out is Young Funeral Home in Monroe, which is now Young Levitt Funeral Home, and the Jackson Funeral Home in Monroe served a lot of families here. And looking back through, as we was walking through, Spear and Spear Funeral Home, Cox Brothers Funeral Home, Eberhart and Son Funeral Home, Sellers Brothers Funeral Homes, and Holger Brooks Funeral Homes in Warmington. Some of them's out of business, some of them still in business, but we always call them, they always did a great job here. And just looking over the cemetery, I know that a lot of you have seen the concrete tops over the grave. That is what we call in our business, it's a surface vault. And a ledger can be placed on top of that, or even some of the vault companies do make little plaques that can go on them. So with a lot of these here, they're very easy to be assessed. It is basically the top of the barrel vault is buried here. and that way you have opportunity to know exactly where your grave is. And I'd just like to thank you for letting me speak a few minutes.
Well, what I want to point out is when we were walking, because that was what started me asking you about the funeral homes. Free advertising on these headstones.
Oh yeah, that was another thing that I hadn't seen. There were some concrete markers that had the funeral home name and an angle, and then the loved one's name, date of birth, and date of death, which until I got to walk in this, I had never seen that. And but that is something unique. Now, about if you get some kind of advertisement, it's usually a little metal marker that big. Some of them's got a piece of paper inside, and when it rains, it's gone. But yeah,
But I thought that was interesting that the entrepreneurs found a way to free advertise.
yeah. Well, and that's kind of like it used to be with the tents. We used to leave a tent in the cemetery, so everybody they call the funeral home and say, "Who did y'all bury down there?" and so and so. But now we take them down because of the weather, the cost, and people actually steal them from cemeteries.
Wouldn't it show up at a family gathering though if you show up and you're eating dinner?
It shows up at the deer lodge where they have deer hunt land. Yeah.
But anyway, well, thank you, Richard,
Thank
for
you.
sharing that. You're going to stay with us, so as people at the end, as we're walking around, if they have questions, you can answer some questions for them.
That'll be good.
Okay, thank
Thank you.
So getting back to the burials, we're going to talk about their traditions of the African Americans. They drew their traditions of burials. They date back to Egypt and West Africa, but they also incorporated the rituals that they formed during and immediately following their years of enslavement in the United States. In the early days of slavery, African Americans, they weren't allowed to collectively mourn their dead. And over time, they had some rebellions and things, and that led to a little bit of relaxation of that restriction and provided them the opportunity to be able to gather. And during the practices of their ancestors, African Americans continued the traditions of carefully washing and dressing the deceased body in their best clothes and holding a viewing for their families. They typically would have what was called, and I may be pronouncing this wrong, it was called a repast. Is that right? Is that what it's called, a repast? Which is an elaborate funeral meal. And they will do that typically following the viewing, the service, and the burial. And at that gathering, people freely express both their grief at the loss and their jubilation of the fact that their deceased was entering heaven. As one of the rare occasions, funerals were one of the rare occasions where African Americans were allowed to socialize. And so it became the norm for them for funerals to attract their friends and families from far and wide. And that would result in such large gatherings that would take on a celebratory nature. And they referred a lot of times to their funerals as homegoings. They were celebrated not only that they were going home to be with the Lord, but that they were leaving behind the iniquities and the sufferings that they experienced here on earth. Historic African American burial traditions often utilized natural markers like rocks, wood, shrubbery, flowers, or grave goods. Grave goods could be any household item, cookware, pots, pans, bottles, plates, anything like that. But again, also any kind of natural object, shells, like I said, rocks and stone, maybe just a stick cross. And over the many, many years, those are lost. They're just reabsorbed back into the earth. And as you're going to walk around out here, you're going to see there's a lot of stones that you'll just see. I mean, here's one right here. I'm sure somebody is right here. You'll just see a rock out there. But the people that just had a cross or anything, those have been lost to time. But they're usually, the African American burial grounds are poorly marked. And that lack of marking, it'll create a unique challenge when we're trying to preserve these sacred sites. And the absence of stone markers, your headstones, any kind of peripheral fencing or front gates, it just makes spaces like this particularly vulnerable to disruption. And I think we've been very fortunate here in Loganville. I don't believe, and Richard, you can add, I don't believe there's ever been a big vandalism situation over here or anything like that. I believe this place has been respected. Has there been vandalism? Okay. Well, we can talk about that in just a little bit. I wasn't aware of that. But yeah, but typically it seems that it's very well maintained. The church does a great job. They maintain this cemetery themselves, and I think they do a fantastic job. But we always need to make sure that we have proper maintenance and attention at all cemeteries, not just this one, because we want to honor our ancestors' final resting places while we provide a historical touchstone for our future generations. And now I'd like to honor the veterans. What I noticed when I was doing my research, as I said, there's 275 identified graves. And if I lost my count, I believe we have 17 veterans that are buried here. That is a very high service rate. That's 6% of the folks buried here have served our nation. And anybody that knows me knows that I love America, and I love anybody that signed up and served to protect our country. And so I'm going to read these names because I think every one of them deserves to have their name read out and to be honored. So bear with me. We have Alfonso Bailey. He was a U.S. Army, Vietnam. Walter Walt Bailey, Private First Class, U.S. Army, World War II. Lace Bennett, he was in Private Company D with the 437th Reserve Battalion, and he was in the Quartermaster Corps during World War I.
You skipped Willie Bailey.
Willie C.
Did I skip that? Okay, Willie C. Bailey Sr., I'm sorry. Private First Class, U.S. Army, World War II. My handwriting all ran together. Lamar Durden, SP4. What is that? Specialist 4th. Okay, he was in the U.S. Army during Vietnam. William Andrew Edwards, U.S. Army. Allie Mae Gaither, U.S. Army. Sarcoma Gaither, U.S. Army. Carl Hammond, Private First Class, U.S. Army, World War II. James W. Kelly, U.S. Navy. Korean War, okay. We'll make a note of that. It's not in any of our records, okay. Martin Bruce Kelly, U.S. Army.
Korean War. Bruce Kelly. I'm sorry.
Okay. Martin Bruce Kelly, U.S. Army, said World War II. Is that correct? Okay. George Perkins was in the Air Force. Melvin Perkins Sr., STM-2, United States Naval Reserve, World War II. Ragsdale Jr., 2nd Class Airman, U.S. Air Force. William Reese Jr., United States Marine Corps, Vietnam. Ronnie O'Neill Tate, U.S. Navy, Vietnam. Newman Barker, Private First Class, Company 1, 370th Infantry, World War II. And Howard Jackson, U.S. Army. So I want to recognize all of those. I appreciate their service to this country. And I want to talk about, as I was doing my research, one that I found a good bit of information on was Lace Bennett. Mr. Bennett died of lung cancer in 1955. And again, being that I love history, when I don't know what something is, I try to find out. So I didn't know what the 437th Reserve Battalion was. What I found out is that was the unit during World War I that was responsible for training recruits and soldiers that were returning to duty after being away or receiving medical care. He also served in the Quartermaster Corps, and that's the military unit responsible for supplying our troops with supplies. Some of their top duties were food. They were responsible for feeding the soldiers, and that required shipping 900,000 tons of food to the Western Front during World War I. They established bakeries so that they could produce bread for our soldiers. And they used systems of trains and telegraphs to coordinate those deliveries of food. They were responsible for laundry and bath services in order to reduce the spread of disease among our soldiers. They were in charge of port operations. They were in charge of mortuary affairs, which is formerly known as grave registration. And they were responsible for aerial delivery, and that included they also packed parachutes. During the 1900s, the fourth leading cause of death in the United States was typhoid fever. And as I looked over death certificates for the folks that I could find them buried here in this cemetery, a lot of the deceased that are buried here succumbed to typhoid fever. And among them was a gentleman named Tom Rockmore. There again, there's that name again. He was born in 1882, and he was the son of Masry and Levi Rockmore. Now his mother, Masry, she is also buried in this cemetery, and she's marked with a headstone. His father, Levi Rockmore, I don't find any record of him being buried here. And Tom was married to a woman named Tina, and I do not find any record of her being buried here. On September 12, 1918, at the age of 36, Tom was drafted for the war. Unfortunately, he was under the care of a doctor for typhoid fever, and he remained under the care of a doctor for 7 days, and he died shortly thereafter. At the time of his death, he lived in Bethlehem, which is just up the road a piece, and he was a farmer for a gentleman named W.F. Reeves. Now, on September 14, 1920, Mr. Reeves filed an application for a charter along with C.C. Gregory, G.W. Woodruff, and A.E. Perry. And their intent in filing that application was to establish a body corporation for a period of 20 years. And they filed that corporation under the name of Gregory Woodruff Company. The business and the office were to be in Winder, and with the option to open more locations. And their business model was to buy and sell groceries, feedstuff, and kindred likes, such as are dealt in grocers. And their capital stock was to be $50,000 divided into shares of $100 each, but could increase their capital stock at any time by a majority vote of stockholders to any other sum not to exceed $100,000. At the time they made that application, they had already raised $20,000 of that $50,000. Now, yes, that has nothing to do with Loganville, but I go down rabbit holes, and so I learned something, you learned something. And so we'll stop there, because if we lived in Winder, we'd keep going, but we don't. Anyway, I want to talk about a gentleman named Claude Catlin. And Mr. Catlin was born in 1908, and he was the son of James T. Catlin and Mattie Lou Carter Catlin. And Claude's father was a reverend, and Claude's occupation was listed as laborer. Now, he was married to Beatrice Catlin, and she lived until 1986, and I can't find any record of her being buried here. Claude and Beatrice went to Charlotte, North Carolina back in 1963. And 5 days short of Claude's birthday, up in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was hit by a car and died on a city street. His cause of death was brain injury and trauma. Now, there's no headstone for Claude, but they did bring him back, and he is buried here. This next story, I cannot confirm this, but I'm going to tell you what I heard, because, hey, it makes a good story. There's a gentleman out here, and if anybody here knows that this to not be accurate or true, please tell me, because I don't want to spread misinformation. But I heard there's a gentleman here buried here. His name was Willie B. Norman. And he died in 1945 when he was 25 years old. And I heard that he was a rather large man, and that his daily job was delivering newspapers. But anytime the circus would come to town, he'd leave work and go join the circus, and he'd be the sideshow. And they'd charge a nickel to look at him. And he must have been well thought of, because he has an extremely nice marble headstone out here that you'll find. It's somewhere right over here. You'll find it when you're out walking around in just a little while. Next, we're going to talk about someone a little more recent, and that's Australia Edwards, because everybody I talked to talked about Strady. That was his nickname, talked about Strady, and what a good man he was.
Amen. Amen.
And so I heard a lot about him. I called his daughter, Charlotte, and talked to her, and she told me that in his early years he was a farmer, and he was in construction, and that he had bought his own farm and operated it off of Shannon Road. She said in 1962, though, he became the night watchman for Walton Manufacturing, and he worked the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every other day. Now, Charlotte and her sister Barbara they're both in our historical society. Charlotte, you were a school teacher. Isn't that what you did, teacher? And then in your retirement, you became the Director of Student Services.
Student services, and then I retired.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for correcting me. And Barbara, I just know that as soon as I came to Loganville, you worked at the Bank of Loganville. Right. So you've always been in banking. So Australia had to be a good man, because I know he raised great children.
Amen.
And
Thank you.
and the other night watchman, and I thought, I know that some of the Ramey family is represented here today, so we'll let them talk in a little while. Clarence Biggin Ramey, and he was the second night watchman that alternated on that. And so, since we're talking about history, we got Walton Manufacturing, because I got one more lady I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about Walton Manufacturing for a second. I found in the records a lady named Adela Bailey. And she was born in 1926, and she passed away at the age of 58. And she was the cleaning lady at Walton Manufacturing. And it appears that upon her passing, the employees collected money and paid for her burial, and she's buried here in this cemetery. And Walton Manufacturing opened in 1957, and I believe a lot of people in this community worked there. I mean, I can't hardly talk to anybody that's old-time Loganville that either didn't work there or had family that worked there. And through the years, they were known as Walton Manufacturing, Walton Clothes, the Loganville Pants Company, Kuppenheimer. I believe they're the DFS menswear outlet right now. But I found it interesting, and we'll talk about this at another historical meeting sometime, but in the 1960s, apparently somebody wanted to start a union over there. And that did not go over well. I found Supreme Court records. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. They fired people that tried to start the union. So there was 4 fired and 9 that were threatened to be fired. And apparently they shut that down. And so that did not occur. The last person I'm going to talk about is a gentleman named Willie Colquitt. Now, Willie Colquitt came into this world in 1903. And he was a farm laborer and a troublemaker. And he was, from what I hear, he was a real town bully, that nobody liked him, that anywhere he went, he caused a problem. Well, apparently on January the 3rd, 1943, at about 10 o'clock at night, while he was instigating trouble at John Wiley's Cafe, he's up there just rebel-rousing, causing problems. And a gentleman named Ferris Hammond, he done had about a belly full. I don't know where he got it, but somewhere he came out with an axe. And he hit Willie right square in the top of his head. And they said that when his skull split, you could hear that reverberate all through town, that it was such a loud noise. He obviously died immediately, and he was buried 2 days later in this cemetery. Now, his exact burial site is unknown because we can't find a headstone. He probably, again, was one that had a rock or a wooden cross. I found it interesting. The informants listed on his death certificate say John Favor and his mama. So Mama didn't apparently get a name, but John Favor and his mama identified the body and said, yeah, that's him. And Dr. Ernest Thompson of Monroe signed the death certificate. A side note to that story is John Wiley, who was the cafe owner where all this occurred. He is buried in this cemetery as well. And he died in 1961 at the age of 77, and his grave is marked with a headstone, but I have found it, and it's being taken up by the earth. It's only about this much of it. It looked like it was probably about that tall originally, but there's just barely enough. You can see his name sticking up out of the dirt, but it's out. I can't remember where I saw it, but it's out here somewhere. And I asked, since I personally, yes, ma'am.
Did the gentleman did he serve time?
I cannot find. I have gone through every newspaper. I cannot find, and I have heard that no, he did not. Nope. I heard that back in the day there were several things of that nature that happened, and it's just one of those things. They turned a blind eye and they just moved on. But since there wasn't a lot of information for me to draw from, and I want to make sure that we honor the buried here properly, I did reach out to the community and I asked if any family member that's alive that has family here would like to come today and share their history, to please come. And so I would like for it, when we finish up here, if those family members would go out to the part of the cemetery where their family is, and as y'all are walking around, ask them questions. They're proud of their families, as we all are. And they want to share with you the history of their family and how they came to Loganville. Because I'm going to tell you, the names that you'll see out here in this cemetery, your Perkins, your Kellys, your Hammonds, your Gaithers, they're not just here now. They've been here generation after generation after generation. They helped form this town. They worked hard for the success of this town. And I went to school with a lot of Perkins and Kellys and Gaithers and Hammonds. They're still here, and their children are here, and I'm sure their grandchildren are here, and they'll be here. This is their home, and they want to share with you the history of their family. So when we break up here a minute, they're going to go out, but some of the families that I know are here today, and if there's others here, just shout out. We have people from the Perkins family, the Kelly family, the Hammond family, the Gaither family, the Jackson family, the Bailey family, the Durden family, and the Edwards family. And I appreciate y'all coming. It's a Sunday afternoon. I'm sure you had other things to do, but that's how important your history is to you, and I want it to be recognized. And so with that, I'm going to close. If y'all have questions, we'll try to answer them, but I think the families are actually going to be the better ones to answer our questions. So I'll open it up at this time to questions. Yes, ma'am.
Has there been ground penetrating radar done to see where there might be graves that?
There has not, and I was talking to Jackie and Jackie Hammond, and you can't use city resources for private affairs, but I believe that this is an important cause, and I promised Jackie that I was going to sit down with some of the folks at the city and see if we could find some way to bring that over here. You'll never know who's down there, but you'll know that there's a body there.
Well, and actually, as you were speaking about the roads being uneven and all, it is possible that there is a straight road.
It is possible.
And another thing you had mentioned is one of the stones was underground. I helped in Monroe with the Zion Church there, and they found stones under the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I found one that was like this far under the ground when we were digging and cleaning. So it's possible that there are more stones.
Right.
They're just
Because Mother Nature is going to reclaim her land. And I mean, you're looking at, well over 100 years. So, yeah, I mean, it's very possible that there are, and like I said, John Wiley's stone there's only about this much of it left sticking up. So, does anybody else have a question that I could answer? Other than that, I'm going to let the families kind of migrate to their sections of the cemetery, and I hope y'all would walk around and look. Then do look. You'll see what I love is looking at all the different headstones. A lot of them have all kinds of intricate markings and things, but some of them they're homemade. Looks like somebody poured a little cement type form and took a chisel and literally just chiseled names in them. And like when they would, like if they, there's one Harrison, I think it is, and they got to Harris, and they just came down here and it says O-N, and then April, it just flows like that. Yeah,
That was a fella here in Loganville named Dub Boyce. E.W. Boyce made those.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Oh, did he make them?
And
I love them. I love them.
I say he put his own scriptures on there.
Yeah.
If you notice, you look at there and some of this on the headstone it says he did what he could.
Yeah.
He made his own saying or his own.
But now some of the actual, like the granite, I mean, well, most of them are marble, but some of the granite and the marbles, a lot of them just say at rest or asleep with the Lord and things like that. But like I said, it just hit me in a funny way when I was talking to Richard. I'm like, look at that, man, they are free advertising. It was like Huggabrooks and this. At first I thought, well, maybe that was a family name, right? And then Richard goes, oh no, that's the funeral home that buried him. I'm like, dang, man, always thinking. But anyway, I appreciate it. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Also, that's buried out here is T.J. Williams.
That's right. I think I just saw Skipper. Skipper, are you still here?
Yeah.
Skip, come here.
And Ernest Ragsdale too. He used to work for the city. His daughter is here.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Also, and I think she has.
Okay.
I wanted to ask
Where's
Junior
Skipper?
Hall about his two employees, TJ and Ern. He got some good stories about
Okay.
TJ and Ern.
Yeah, come on up here, Junior, so you'll be on film. Skipper, come on up.
One of your interesting stories about TJ
You
and
need this?
Get going, Melon. You long Melon. Good to see you.
You want to talk about your daddy?
Oh yeah. Just in case y'all didn't know, my daddy, he was a hard worker. He worked for the city many years. All his life. And I believe that's where I get some of my hard work ethics from. He was right here, where all the plumbing was, he would come out late at night, Mr. Hall, he would come and get him all the time of night, we got a water leak right here, and Daddy would always, come on out and get the job done. So, he was a good man, now. So he left me his little spot over there where he lived at. So I got his little spot now, so that's where I live at.
He drove that case backhoe everywhere. Even on his off time, you see him coming up saying me ain't on that case backhoe.
Yeah. So,
TJ, he done a lot. I mean, he worked for the city all of his life. When I was mayor, they didn't have a lot of people working there then.
That's right.
If I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, we had a busted water line. Well, I went to get TJ. He was ready to go. And we went, and one time we was going to look at a sewage plant. And we're going to fly up there. And so I told TJ, I said, TJ, I want you to go with us. I said, okay. So anyway, I said, we're leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning now, you be ready. Okay. I got down there, you couldn't find TJ, and got out there, get City Hall, nobody seen nothing, no, so we had to leave. So when I got back, I said, TJ, where was you at this morning? He said, I'm behind the building out there. I said, well, I thought you wanted to go with us. He said, no. So I said, I got to thinking if that airplane quit running, who they're going to ask to get out and crank it. he was a good one. Though. All the kids loved him, and one time was coming down when he was reading water meters. He's coming down the street, and a little white girl run out and said, TJ, give me that cap. Fished it right over to him. He did a good job.
Yes, sir. So, I just want to just say that about my daddy, Like I say, he know where every water leak, every water main, the sewers and everything was in Loganville, so.
If you had a job to do, you didn't have to explain it. Just tell him where it was at and don't bother him. It'd be finished.
Get it done.
Some of those places are still hidden to the officials today.
He got good stories. Did you want to say anything about Ern Jr.?
Ern Jr., he was a fine fella too. And he worked real hard. And him and TJ, they lived in the fire department for a while. And so he come in one time, and TJ had moved his bed and put it on a fire truck. And so I said, what would happen if they had a fire and had to get him? He said, well, it wouldn't drag him far. But Ern was a good fellow, but Hezzy came. One Hezzy came. So he was on the garbage truck. And so one day this lady called me at City Hall and she said, there's a man in my garbage can, I want him out. I thought it was somebody just to tinkle around with it. So I said, well, go tell him. She said, I ain't going out there. So I went out there, and it was Hezzy. He had got tangled. He was drinking too heavy that day. He got tangled up, and he fell backwards in the garbage can. Wasn't nothing but his head and his feet sticking out. And so I shook him out, and I said, what happened? He said, I had a fainting spell. So I told him, I said, well, I'm going to take you home, and we're not going to knock your pay for this. And but he was a good. I tell you what's the truth. I knew as many black people in Loganville as I did white people, and we was all friends. And when I run for re-election, they didn't vote for me because they were scared of them. They voted for me because they liked me. And we liked each other too. We had a good thing going.
Thank you, Junior.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to share about your family here? Or you want to go out there?
That's right. We did love you, Junior.
Okay. Y'all tired? All right.
You did a lot of
Well,
good
thank everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And I guess next year we'll pick another one and do it again. Thank y'all.
Miss Lon?
Yes, sir.